Good morning. It's good to see everybody that made it out this morning. I know we've got several traveling, several sick, and hope that they are able to return soon. This morning, we're going to continue our trip through the Exodus. Chronologically in the book, really the next part to cover would be as God is giving the commandments to Moses for the construction of the tabernacle and the fashioning of the Ark of the Covenant and all of those things, and Bezalel, and I decided not to cover that. One, because I've got to get through this at some point. So there's some stuff that's just going to have to not be covered. But two, I'd given a lesson about Bezalel. It's been now a while back, but I didn't feel like it was fair to everybody to make y'all sit through another lesson about Bezalel, although I find all of that very fascinating, and I would encourage you to go and study it. But where we left off last time, just summarizing where we've been, of course, God has promised to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob the land of Canaan. Moses has led them out of Egyptian bondage, and when we left them last time, Moses had gone up into the mount, and I facetiously said that Aaron and the children of Israel were minding their P's and Q's down at the bottom of the mount as Moses is receiving the law. And we're going to pick up there over in, start actually in Exodus chapter 19 and verse 18. As the Lord is preparing the children of Israel for this event where God is going to give the law to Moses, in Exodus chapter 19 and verse 18 it says, "And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly." As Brad mentioned, there's a rumble that's kind of like a drum beating. And last night we heard a noise that sounded like jets were taking off right outside of our house. I want you to imagine being here and hearing and seeing the Lord coming down on the mountain. What a frightful thing that must have been, to see the smoke ascending as the smoke of a furnace and the whole mount quaking greatly. And it's this mount that Moses climbs to go and meet with God. And in Exodus chapter 20, in verses 2 through 6, God gives, among his, what we call the 10 Commandments, but the first that he gives is, he says, "I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments." And so God here gives a very simple command, to not have any gods before him, and to make no graven images of anything that is on the earth or in the air or in the water, not to make any image to bow down to and to worship. In Exodus chapter 23, as God has talked with Moses, he says, he's talking to him about God's protection and about how he's going to give them the land that is promised to the fathers. It says, "For mine angel shall go before thee." This is Exodus chapter 23 and verse 23. "For my angel shall go before thee and bring thee unto the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. Thou shalt not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do after their works, but thou shalt utterly destroy them, or overthrow them, and quite break down their images." And so God here is reinforcing that when you go into this land, there's going to be images. There's going to be these graven items that you're going to have to overthrow and to break down. God, again, being a very, very jealous God, makes clear to the children of Israel, "I expect for you not to worship these false gods." In chapter 24 and verse 3, Moses comes back from the mountain, tells the people what God has told him. It says in verse 3 of chapter 24, "And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which the Lord hath said will we do." We've talked about this a couple of times, where it's presented to the children of Israel what God wants them to do, and they'll, "Yep, we're going to do that." Okay, so among these things that Moses would have told them were these commandments about not making graven images and breaking down the images as they enter into the land. In Exodus chapter 24 and verse 12, God calls Moses again. It says, "Come up to me into the mountain, be there, and I will give thee tables of stone and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them." And Moses rose up and his minister Joshua, and Moses went up unto the mount of God. And he said unto the elders, "Tarry ye here for us until we come again unto you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come unto them." And so Moses and Joshua go back up to the mount, and Moses says, I'm leaving Aaron and Hur in charge here. If you have anything y'all need to tend to, talk to them. Having been in a home where there were times where our parents would leave to go various places, there would always be a delegation of authority, typically to Brent, which seemed like the worst thing to do. Primogenitor being not always the best way to think of how to do things, but I'm leaving so-and-so in charge. Okay, so Aaron and Hur, the two people left in charge, as Moses goes up into the mount. And while Moses is there, he receives commandments about how to construct the tabernacle, of the goods that are to be used for the construction, how the Ark of the Covenant is to be made and how it's to be carried, how the priestly garments were to be made, and he appoints Bezalel to construct those things. And Moses receives all of these commandments. Exodus chapter 24 and verse 18 says, And Moses went into the midst of the cloud and gat him up into the mountain. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So again, call back to the sight of the smoke of the Lord coming down on this mount and the terrible thing that it must have been. And Moses says, I'll be back, Aaron's in charge, and he's gone for 40 days and 40 nights. It's a long time. Mom and Dad would typically be gone for 2 to 3 hours. If they went to the Boston Sea Party with Larry and Narda, it was sometimes 12 or 15 hours, it felt like. It's a long time to be left without the person who's leading you. And so the children of Israel, as Moses is up there, begins to get nervous. Day after day, they wonder, when is Moses going to come back? And in Exodus chapter 32 and verse 1, again, we're skipping some chapters because there's several chapters devoted to the creation of the things that God has commanded. But in Exodus chapter 32 and verse 1, it says, And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, and said unto him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not or know not what has become of him. So for 40 days, they're looking at this mountain, they're seeing the smoke and hearing the rumbling, and they're beginning to think, we don't know what happened to this guy. We don't know if he's coming back or not. And so they call upon Aaron, the one who's in charge, to make them gods. And he does the only logical thing that he can do, knowing that Moses has been gone for 40 days. In verse 2 it says, And Aaron said unto them, Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons, and of your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people brake off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graving tool. And after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, These be thy gods of Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation, and said, Tomorrow is a feast day to the Lord. And they rose up early on the morrow, and offered burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and rose up to play. So these people, these slaves, who are wandering through the desert, start breaking off their earrings, and they're adorned with gold. And if you haven't been with us the whole time, you may be wondering, where did these people get this gold? Well, you'll remember before the children of Israel, if you have been here, before the children of Israel left, God told them, plunder the Egyptians. Now, I think the reason God told them to do that was because he wanted them to craft the things he just told Moses about. There were going to be breastplates and ephods and altars covered with gold and overlaid with gold and censers and all these different things, bowls and all of that were going to be covered in gold because they were to be holy to God. And so God, knowing that the children of Israel would need gold, said, Go and plunder the land of Egypt. Because we won't make a bigger point of this later, this is kind of a side note, I want to ask us, are we using the things that God has given us for the purpose for which he's given them to us? Right? So the children of Israel have all this gold. They're wandering around looking like Audrey Hepburn in a movie wearing all this fancy jewelry. And rather than using it for the purpose that God really has called them to use it for, they break off their earrings and give it to Aaron and say, Make us a false god. Make us something that we can worship. And I think oftentimes God has blessed us with things for us to accomplish a specific purpose. And too often we take those things and we redirect them for a different purpose. And whatever that may be, whether it's the time that you have or Hugh talked about the comforts of life with which we've been blessed, our jobs, our homes. Are we using the things that God has blessed us with for his purpose? Or are we like the children of Israel, breaking off those things and saying, let's use them over here? And I just ask that as kind of a side note as we pause at this particular moment. I want to ask why a calf? And what did it represent? Now, this is kind of a weird thing because the children of Israel say, make us gods. Not because God is not here, but because we don't know what's happened to Moses. So there's something weird going on here. And Aaron makes this calf, but when he makes this calf, he proclaims a feast day not to the calf, but to the Lord. So you look at this and go, what exactly is going on? Well, I think part of this is that we often think of graven images as being the God, right? Like we would make a golden calf and we would worship that calf. In many instances, that graven image was a representation, a physical representation, the tangible thing, so you can say, okay, this is a representation of our God. And there's some thought that that's really what Aaron was doing, was trying to give them something so they could see God being with them. The other thing about this being a calf, cows were used a lot in idol worship, both in Egypt and in Canaan. And we talked about the fact that they were in Canaan, they were used to the customs of the land, or they were in Egypt, they were used to the customs of the land of Egypt. There was an Egyptian god named Apis, and I'm certain I'm not pronouncing that right, but there was an Egyptian god named Apis who was a calf. And it was very common to see these calves in Memphis, which, not Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis, Egypt. And it was a very famous god to pray to because he was the god of fertility and strength. So there's some thought that we're borrowing a little bit from the past. The children of Israel also would have been familiar with the customs of the Canaanites. As we talked about at the beginning, there were trade among the different regions. The children of Israel had actually come from Canaan. You'll remember when Jacob sent all of his family down into Egypt, they were in Canaan when that all happened. Baal was often represented by a cow or a calf. And so there's some thought that Aaron was trying to take some of the old and merge it with God and trying to make something that they were familiar with that would be something that they were comfortable with. And I think it's the case that this calf is not really a new God necessarily, but maybe an attempt to make a visual representation of the Lord God of Israel. And I think that's highlighted by the fact that Aaron doesn't declare a feast to this calf or to Baal or to Apis. He declares a feast to the Lord. But God has clearly commanded the children of Israel not to do this kind of thing. In fact, he said, I don't want any graven images. And when you go to the new land, I want you to get rid of everything they have. And yet we find Aaron here, having received this commandment, doing exactly what God had asked them not to do. And so it's not surprising that God has a reaction. So Moses and God are up on the mountain. God is presenting the commandments to Moses. And God pauses in Exodus chapter 32 and verse 7. And he says, go get thee down, for thy people which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, these be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said unto Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them, and I will make of thee a great nation. So, unsurprisingly, God is really not happy with this. He says, they have turned aside quickly out of the way which I've commanded, and certainly that was the case. Less than 40 days after Moses has given them this commandment, they've already turned tail and done something different. In verses 11 through 14, Moses hears God saying this, and he says, Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, which thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, for mischief did he bring them out, to slay them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from thy fierce wrath, and repent of this evil against thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thine own self, and saidst unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give unto your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord repented, or relented, is what some versions say, of the evil which he thought to do unto his people. And so Moses goes to God and says, please don't do this. Remember that you've promised to them. And God ultimately decides not to utterly destroy them. Now, as Moses here is pleading with God, he can't understand why God's wrath is so hot. Why is your anger so hot against the children of Israel? And in verse 15, as it says, he turns and goes down the mountain. He had the two tables of the testimony which were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides, on the one side and on the other were they written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said unto Moses, there is a noise of war in the camp. And he said, it is not the voice of them that shout for mastery, neither is it the voice of them that cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that sing do I hear. And so Moses and Joshua, as they begin to descend the mount, they can't quite figure out what's going on. They hear noises. Joshua thinks it's that there's some battle that's come and they need to hurry up and get back. But they ultimately decide it sounds like singing. You kind of think of the Who's in Whoville singing off in the distance. They come down and hear this singing. They can't quite make out what's going on. In verse 19 it says, and it came to pass as soon as he came nigh unto the camp that he saw the calf and the dancing. And interestingly it says, and Moses' anger waxed hot. And remember, he's holding these two tablets, which are the works of God. God has written on these tablets. These are the most holy thing that Moses has ever put his hands on. And he's so mad that he takes these tables and he throws them down and breaks them beneath the mount. Remember, Moses is the one that asked God, why are you so mad? And we find Moses here, when he discovers what had happened, he's very angry as well. In Exodus chapter 32 and verse 20, it says, and he took the calf which they had made and burnt it in the fire and ground it to powder and strawed it upon the water and made the children of Israel drink of it. Pretty strong response from Moses. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, but he makes them drink of the calf. Aaron's response, we pick up in verse 21. It says, and Moses said unto Aaron, what did this people unto thee, that thou hast brought so great a sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord wax hot. Thou knowest the people that they are set on mischief. For they said unto me, make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what has become of him. Let's pause here for a second. Aaron's right down the line of what Exodus chapter 32 and verse 1 said. We don't know what's happening with Moses. Make us gods that can go before us. But then he takes a left turn. It says, and he said unto him, whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. We're fine. So they gave it me. We're fine. Cast it into the fire. Fine. And there came out this calf. Now, Aaron's trying to sell a story to Moses that is hard to believe. They broke their gold off. I threw it in, and this calf came out of it. I don't know what happened, but these people, the mischief they're under, them. They're not fit for obeying anybody. And so Aaron gives this response to Moses' anger. And you'll notice that Aaron asked the same thing, or beseeches Moses for the same thing Moses besought the Lord. Don't be so mad. Don't let your anger wax hot with me. And so in verse 26, God prescribes a penalty for this infraction, if you will, for this breach of the commandments. It says here, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. And he said unto them, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. Imagine the slaughter that took place that day. This is hand-to-hand combat, and it's brother on brother, neighbor against neighbor. And this is God's declaration of a punishment for failing to hear what he had asked them to do. Moses offered himself for the sins of the people. He knew that these 3,000 people's lives were not enough to pacify God's wrath. And in verse 30 it says, and it came to pass on the morrow that Moses said unto the people, ye have sinned a great sin. And now I will go up unto the Lord. Peradventure I shall make an atonement for your sin. And Moses returned unto the Lord and said, oh, this people have sinned a great sin, and have made them gods of gold. Yet now, if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written. And the Lord said unto Moses, whosoever has sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. So Moses goes to God and says, if you'll forgive it, great. I'm thankful. There's a dash there, right? Which is kind of an interesting thing if you're familiar with the Bible. It's kind of a pause. If you'll forgive the sin, you can kind of imagine Moses, I'd be relieved, But if not, take me out of the book. It's a pretty strong request that Moses makes, a pretty sacrificial request that Moses makes. But God rejects this atonement. Moses wasn't sufficient to atone for the sins of the people. And God says, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. So it's a rough day for Moses and the children of Israel, right? 3,000 people have died. Moses has gone out. He's pled on behalf of the people, and God says, I'll take care of the people who need to be blotted out of my book. You're not going to atone for this. We're at the end of chapter 32. We're going to roll over to the first 3 verses of chapter 33. It says, And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart and go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land which I swear unto Abraham, and to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way. After all these bad things, after the children of Israel have disobeyed flagrantly the commandment of God, after Aaron, the high priest, has disobeyed and done this horrible thing, God says, all right, it's time to get moving. I've promised you a land. I'm going to get you into that land. God's not forgotten about the promise. God's not turned his back on the children of Israel. He's going to fulfill his side of the promise. And so we'll stop there for today. So I want to talk about 3 different things quickly this morning. First of all, God's perspective versus our perspective. And this is illustrated in two different ways. Now I want you to think about God seeing the children of Israel versus Moses seeing the children of Israel. So as Moses at first is asking God, why is your anger so hot? It's because he doesn't have the perspective of God. He's not seeing what God is seeing. And as soon as Moses comes into sight of those things, he has, if not a more serious reaction, certainly a strong reaction to that. And he says himself, my anger waxes hot. You know, sometimes we think we have pretty crystal clear, I have a pretty good grasp of what's going on. And I think we should acknowledge our limitations when we see things that we don't have the perspective that God has. The second one is Aaron's excuse. You know, Aaron comes up and he's telling this story to Moses. Moses is just asking him what happened. Because again, Moses was not there to see how this calf was created. And so as Aaron is telling him this story and he says, I put this in the fire and out a calf came, perhaps he could fool Moses. Perhaps Moses thought, well, maybe. I mean, we look at that and go, no, there's no way that happened. But maybe he fooled Moses for a minute. But he never fooled God. You know, Moses was on the mount when this happened, but God was in the mount and with Aaron. And God saw everything that happened. God sees everything. God knew what Aaron had done. And Moses hadn't seen it, so he had to rely on Aaron's account. And so over in Hebrews chapter 4, in verse 13, Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 13 says, Neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and opened unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do. God sees everything. You know, there's not going to be a time where, I can slip this by him because they weren't there and I can tell them a story. God's there. And to him, all things are open and naked. Luke chapter 12 and verses 1 through 3. Jesus here gives kind of a chilling statement. Luke chapter 12 verses 1 through 3. It says, In the meantime, when there were gathered together an innumerable multitude of people, insomuch that they trode one upon another, he began to say unto his disciples, first of all, Beware ye of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. Therefore, whatsoever ye have spoken in darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which ye have spoken in the ears and closets shall be proclaimed upon the housetops. You know, Aaron may have hid that from Moses. He might have been able to get away with it for a time. He didn't hide it from God. And we're not hiding anything from God when we do things and say things in secret. We may hide it from people. We may be able to get around people for a time. But God sees all of it. And God knows all of it. You know, I think it's interesting that God in his wrath, in his righteous anger, even in the hottest moment before Moses had interceded on the people's behalf, was still planning to adhere to his plan. Go back to Exodus chapter 32 in verse 10. Exodus chapter 32 and verse 10. You know, there are times when I've been really mad about something, typically about work. And I'll come home from work and I'll be just really letting Amber have it, you know. I'm going to do this, and I can't wait till I do. I'm just going to tell them this, and I'm going to say this. And the next morning I wake up and I have no plan. But in that moment of my hot anger, I lose my way, because the next morning or after Amber says, chill out, it's not that big of a deal, I kind of come to myself. God never leaves himself. In Exodus chapter 32 and verse 10, he says, now therefore let me alone, that my wrath, I'm going to have trouble with this passage all morning, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them, and I will make of thee a great nation. So God says, I'm going to wipe out all these people, but I'll make a great nation out of you, Moses. Why is that a continuation of God's promise? Well, Moses was a Levite. Exodus chapter 2 tells us that he was the son of a Levite woman and a Levite man. And so Levi was a child of Jacob, who was a child of Isaac, who was a child of Abraham. And even in his hottest anger, God still was going to fulfill his plan, was still going to provide his side of the promise. And I find it remarkable that God, through his wrath, still adheres to his eternal plan. Even when he's his most mad, he's faithful. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26, I think about myself again in that moment where I'm going to let somebody have it. And I read these next two passages we're going to read through a different lens. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 26, be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath. And we can turn over in James chapter 1 and in verse 19 where it says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. And what I want to mention here is the wrath of God still works the righteousness of God, right? He never gets so mad that he loses sight of his eternal plan and his righteousness and his eternal promise that he's given. When I get mad, however, I lose sight of everything. And so God instructs us, don't be angry and sin. Be slow to speak, slow to wrath, swift to listen. And I think it's because he knows us. And he knows we're going to be like Moses, who, hey, don't be so mad. And then when he finds out, he's ready to just throw everything away. And so it's important for us to understand there's a difference between our perspective of things and God's perspective of things and how we deal with things. You know, if we knew what God knew, we might have different reactions to things. You know, after Moses came down to the camp, he probably thought to himself, that's why God was so mad. I get it now. We don't have the benefit of the perspective, and so we should trust God, knowing that he sees all things. He's seen what we cannot see. He knows what we cannot know, and so we should trust in him, and we've talked about that several different times. Secondly, if ever there's a story of failed leadership, this is it, right? So Moses leaves and says, Aaron and Hur are in charge, and the very first thing that happens is Aaron blows it in a tremendous way. And even if you buy Aaron's account, he's a failed leader. In Exodus chapter 32 and verse 22, he starts laying the blame at the feet of the people. And certainly they're to blame, but it doesn't absolve him from guilt. He says, thou knowest the people that they are set on mischief. In verse 23 he says, for they said unto me, make us gods which shall go before us. They wanted to do this. You know, Aaron really here is being a follower of the masses. He's called to a position of leadership, but what he's really doing is following the crowd. And so what really happened is he didn't throw gold into the fire and it pop out. In verse 4, it says, and he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool. They said, we want something, we want you to make us something. Someone fetch me my tools. I need to go make a molten calf. That's what Aaron did. That was his role in this deal. Rather than saying, wait, we were just told the commandment of God to not make graven images. He goes and grabs graving tools. Like, you look at this and go, what was he thinking? You know, but he was listening to the people. The people had come to him and wanted this. In Matthew chapter 15 and verse 14, I'm not going to turn over and read that for sake of time, but it talks about the blind being leaders of the blind, and if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. We know that, right? If you're following somebody who can't see for themselves and you can't see for yourself as well, that surely spells doom for you. I want to look at this, how Paul mentions it. Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, in verse 1, Paul's idea of leadership is different from what most of us think leadership is. We got to lead, right? Paul's view of leadership when it comes to our spiritual lives is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1. It says, "Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ." Follow me in following Christ. So Paul's going to lead them, but he's going to lead them in the path that Christ has asked them to go. Biblical leadership is that God is the leader of all. That's the starting point of any biblical leadership, whether it's from a congregational standpoint or your personal lives. You are a leader to people, whether you appreciate that or not. There are kids here who are looking at me going, "I'm not a leader," that Clara looks up to and other kids look up to. You are a leader in some way. And the number one way to lead is to look to God to lead. That's found over in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1, where Paul says, "Be ye therefore followers of God as dear children." The number one rule of leadership when it comes to our spiritual lives is follow God first. Because Paul may not follow God as closely as you should follow God. We may have leaders in this congregation, or there may be evangelists, or there may be all sorts of people that we look to for leadership who are not following or not patterning their lives after God. And when that happens, we should push the pause button and say, let me look around this fella and see if he's going the right direction, right? Ultimately, God is our leader, and biblical leadership will take us there, but ultimately we are responsible for ourselves to follow God. There's a great responsibility of leaders. You know, Paul, when he was talking to Timothy over in 2 Timothy chapter 4, talked about how the people will heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And so as a leader, it's very tempting to do what Aaron did. The people want something, let me give it to them. Everybody likes to be a people pleaser, right? But Paul cautions Timothy against that. He talks about enduring adversity or enduring affliction, in not following, not giving himself in to teaching in a way that allows people to have that itching ear scratched. There's a great responsibility for both the teacher to make sure you're not giving the people what they want to hear necessarily, but there's also a great responsibility for the led, right? And so, you know, there's been times back before Waze and phones where we would head out somewhere and someone would be the lead car. And you generally trust that this person was driving the right direction because they've looked at the map and they've plotted a course and we'll follow them. Now, I want you to imagine if you had never been to Memphis, Tennessee, and you're following behind somebody and you're driving down the road and you notice San Antonio, 222 miles. And then you come upon a sign that says San Antonio, 150 miles. And then you come upon the next sign, San Antonio, 75 miles. And if you're familiar with the map at all, you're beginning to think, okay, I'm getting closer to San Antonio. I'm heading west when Memphis is actually east of here. A lot of times in our spiritual lives, we may be able to look at signs and go, I don't know that I'm going the right direction, but this guy knows better. We see it all across the spiritual world today. I'm going to follow the leader. I'm going to follow my pastor. Where he leads, I'll follow. That song's not about that pastor. That song's about God. Where God leads, I'll follow. And so we as the led have a responsibility to make sure we're looking and making sure, okay, this is consistent with the Bible, and we're going to head this way, because that's what God says, not because that's what the leader says. And so we have an obligation, and Aaron stands as an example of complete failure of leadership and a complete failure to be led properly. Finally, you know, there's something to be drawn out of this, I think, about new life or true repentance. You know, Aaron was really trying to blend what the children of Israel were familiar with what God wanted them to do, right? So I'm not going to cast aside God because I know he's the one who's brought us out. So let's have a feast to God, but we're going to make this calf because that's kind of what these people are familiar with from a cultural standpoint of how to represent a God. And so he's bringing some from the old and trying to bring it with the new. And God was pretty emphatic that that's not what he wanted to have happen. In Exodus chapter 32, in verse 20, Exodus chapter 32 and verse 20, when Moses comes upon this scene, it says he took the calf. I heard some laughs when I read this. He took the calf which they had made and burnt it in the fire and ground it to powder and strawed it upon the water and made the children of Israel drink of it. Moses could have come up with a lot of different ways to address that situation, right? All right, we're going to leave in the morning. we're going to leave this calf behind. We're just going to pretend like it never happened. He could have taken a hammer and broken it up and left it there. Moses was sending a signal to the children of Israel. I'm going to burn it. I'm going to grind it into a powder. I'm going to sprinkle it on the water, and you fellas are going to drink this. Now, if you were there on that occasion where they got to drink the water that this gold dust had been spread into, I'm guessing that's a pretty effective event, right? Pretty memorable event for you to have participated in. I don't think we'll be making any molten calves for the rest of this trip, right? You would think that we can look at this and go, all right, we may stumble, we may fall, we may do a lot of crazy things, but this congregation's never going to have a molten calf up here, right? I mean, that's what Moses was trying to get across. When you end something, when you do away with something, you get rid of it completely. And that's the concept that Paul gives us over in Romans chapter 6 when it talks about crucifying the old man. When we talk about baptism and how the old man is dead, over in Romans chapter 6, Romans chapter 6 and verse 6, it says, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, not left behind, not put in storage because we don't need it right now. It's destroyed. So think about your old man, think about your old life, and think about what Moses did. Take your old life and burn it and stamp it and grind it and put it in the water so it never can reform itself, and drink it so that you have a personal reminder of what happened. That's what God calls upon us to do with our old life. Zach talked about this fairly recently about our old life and doing away with it. Even doing that, I want you to look at 1 Kings chapter 12, I think it is. 1 Kings chapter 12. So what did the children of Israel want to do? They wanted to have gods that they could worship. And they said, these be the gods that brought you up out of the land of Egypt, right? That's when the molten calf was made. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 26. Now, the kingdom has split. You've got Judah in the south, which has Jerusalem. You've got Israel in the north. And we've got Jeroboam, who's the king of Israel, up in the north, and he's nervous because he's sitting here saying, you know what? People are going to go down to Jerusalem to worship because they know that's where they need to worship. And when they get down there, they're going to affiliate with Judah, and they're going to leave me. They're going to go with the king down there. So I got to stop that. He comes up with this brilliant plan that no one will understand. In verse 26, it says, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel. If you were his counselor, what would you not have suggested? And made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel, the other he put in Dan. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. Not only did he make the calf, which should start sending some alarm bells, but he pulled the exact same phrase from the book of Exodus. These be the gods that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Even having repented and having this memorial and all of this, we still find a way to go back to sin. So do the best you can, get rid of it, but understand that sometimes it's still going to come back on you. And do the best you can to get rid of it and don't give in to it. Have some muscle memory to say, I've done that before. It didn't go well. Not like the children of Israel who decided to follow and do this same thing. I lost track of my pages. You know, in Exodus chapter 32 and verse 26, I want to talk about Aaron and what he did here. In verse 26, it says, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. So there was a moment where Moses said, all right, it's time to repent. If you're on the Lord's side, you need to come over here. And it says all the sons of Levi. You know who that included? Aaron. He was the son of Levi. Aaron repented of the thing that he had done. He knew that he needed to be on the Lord's side. He repented of the sin that he had committed. You know, again, that day of slaughter had to be a rough day. And Aaron had to have felt responsible for the 3,000 souls that died. Aaron had to feel responsible for the fact that Moses had to go up and beseech the Lord for forgiveness. But that next day, God said, keep on going. Keep heading to the promised land. And Aaron had that second chance, that new lease on life. And so in conclusion, as we've talked about the string that's being pulled, through egregious sin, through blatant, willful sin, God still had a plan, and he was still going to execute it. Though there was punishment for that sin, he remains focused on the plan. And that plan was to get them to the land of Canaan. And he takes off right away after he punishes them and says, all right, get up and go. We got to keep going. I want to talk about one other string very quickly. Exodus chapter 32, we talked about how Moses went to God and said, if you can't forgive them this sin, then blot me out of your book. The concept of names being blotted out of God's book. Over in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 5, as the angel is writing the letter to the church at Sardis, Revelation chapter 3 and verse 5, it says, he that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Where God, when Moses went to him and said, whoever transgresses, I will blot him out of the book, because we have someone who was worthy to atone for us. Remember, Moses was not worthy, because Christ was worthy to atone for our sins. If we're faithful, if we're able to overcome the temptations and trials of this life, he says, I'll never blot your name out of the book. Even though we've transgressed, because Christ has given himself for us, I won't blot your name out of the book. And again, that's another string that's being pulled through this, that through Christ we have hope of better promises. And so this morning we want to offer you the opportunity to avail yourself of the grace and mercy that is offered to us through Christ, that Moses and Aaron and blood of bulls and goats could never provide. And that's the opportunity to have your name written in the book of life and the promise that it will never be blotted out. And if you've not submitted yourself to God in baptism, we'd encourage you to do that this morning. Or if you need the prayers of the church for any reason, we'd ask that you come as we sing.